I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, and I have two very special guests today. Before I start, I'd like to get you in the mood a little bit for being comfortably zoned the Ralph Tycho way. Here it is. Here we go, little music for you to start it out.
Well, it's all right, riding around in the breeze. Well, it's all right, if you live the life you please. Well, it's all right, doing the best you can. Well, it's all right, as long as you lend a hand.
You know, that was beautiful. As long as you lend a hand. And that's what life's all about. That's what Comfortably Zoned is all about. You get to the end of the line, and you realize the importance of things. Help out your fellow man. And that's the message from Comfortably Zoned today. I'm going to waste no further time but to introduce you to my two guests. One name is very easy to pronounce. It's Arnold Hano. And Arnold Hano wrote the greatest book I read when I was a kid, being a New York Giant fan growing up. It was about and was entitled A Day in the Bleachers. And I'm delighted to have Arnold Hano with me. And he'll help me learn to pronounce John's last name, who wrote a documentary about the life of Arnold Hano, which that book, as great as it was, one of the all-time classics in baseball literature, is not the only thing that defines Mr. Hano's life. And John Lukendakis, I know I'm mispronouncing that. John, you want to help me with that one?
Sure. The last name is Leonidakis.
Leonidakis. You wrote you're producing a documentary on Mr. Hano's life, and I'd like to say hello to you now, Mr. Hano. It's a pleasure to have you on Comfortably Zoned Radio.
Well, thank you very much, and my feet are still tapping from the music.
Okay. Mr. Hano, I know from doing a little bit of homework that the person that influenced you the most getting into literature was your older brother, Alfred, if I'm not mistaken, who tragically perished during the war. He had you reading when you were 3 years old. Am I correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Alfie was 3.5 years older than I.
And I think that's miraculous. He was in literature too. You and he, before the war, worked together and collaborated on some things, and that got you into it. Can I ask about your early baseball fandom? I know you were a fan of Bob and Irish Musial, not Musial.
Well,
Musial.
Yes, the Musial brothers. Our family lives on Edgecombe Avenue in Washington Heights, 1 block away from the Polo Grounds. And in that same apartment building, Bob and Irish Musial lived. When Bob Musial and the Yankees were in town, Bob lived in that apartment. When the Yankees were out of town, Irish lived in that apartment. And
oh, wow.
So I got to know the Musials. I used to say to my father, "Who's better, Bob or Irish?" And my father, who was very precise, a man who didn't like nicknames, he said, "Well, Bob has the better arm, but Emil, E-M-I-L, it has more power." So I said, yes, but what's the answer? He said, "You decide." And so I had to go and watch the two of them and decide one way or the other.
What did you decide, just out of curiosity?
Well, because I was a Giant fan, I just thought that Irish was the better ball player, but I'm not sure that I was correct.
Okay, but isn't that interesting how being a fan forever leads, we lose our objectivity. And
yes.
I think that's all.
That's
all part. Okay. And you will, you have objectivity about Willie Mays because you sat in the bleachers in 1954 when he made that catch in the World Series, running back to home plate towards you at that time. And that is basically what was an outline for your book. You talked about that day in the bleachers, and you combined it with a social history that ranks right up there with Charles Einstein's book about Willie Mays. It's not just baseball; it's the times you lived in right. That. And may I ask you, the major now you're living in 2015. You started writing in 1930. What is, and I'm looking at this, I'm 68, and I'm saying these are crazy times. These are nutso. How must you feel about the state of the world today?
The state of the world or the state of baseball, or both?
Both.
Well, the state of the world is a mess because everything seems to be out of the hands of any one person, any one nation. With the ISIS people, for instance, and with weather changes and things of that nature. It is almost as though we live in a chaotic bubble, and you've got to get your feet grounded on something more solid than bubble juice, and so it's difficult. But then it's been difficult throughout the 93 years of my life. The Great Depression, World War II, etc. All those things made life difficult. But somehow or other, people, if we stay with people and forget about the machines and gadgets, the people remain wonderful and thrilling, and that does not change. Now, baseball has changed a lot. Mainly it's the dollar sign that has changed in baseball. Willie Mays made, at the peak of his career, $140,000 a year. Today, a utility infielder who will maybe play 8 or 9 ball games and appear as a pinch runner once or twice gets $500,000. That's really screwed up, don't you think?
Oh,
anyway,
are you kidding? And it's also screwed up that the owners of any corporation, the CEOs, are making 500 times what the workers are making, and the workers are not.
You're right. The wages have not gone up, and in a nation that is very, very wealthy, that's a disgusting situation, and I disparage that, and I yearn for a change there. What can be done, I do not know.
Okay. You do have hope for the future?
I do have hopes for the future, yes. But my own future is fairly limited, don't you imagine? I'm 93. My son.
Hey, I'm 68. We're all day to day. And not guaranteed anything along the way. So, but yes, 93. And by the way, for 93, you're in the game, Mr. Hano.
Thank you.
All right. What do you do with yourself these days?
Well, I talk to a lot of people about this film that's being made. I go to doctors' offices. My wife and I spend our time going to Trader Joe's and to restaurants, and I go to meetings of the city council and stand at the lectern and bawl out the council, and that's what I do for a living.
Okay, John, why don't you help Arnold describe the documentary and how it got started in your mind, and the modest Mr. Hano, his initial reaction when you came to him with the proposal.
Well, I first learned about Arnold when I was 9 years old. I grew up in San Francisco, a big fan of the Giants and Willie Mays. And the second baseball book I ever read that took out of school library was a book about Willie Mays, a biography, and I distinctly remembered it was written by a man named Arnold Hano. And I enjoyed the book, and I remembered as I was growing up, I did see his name from time to time in Sport magazine, but really it didn't really hit me about Arnold and his prolific career as a writer until I really got into making baseball documentaries as a result of my association with the Baseball Reliquary, the sort of a left coast version of the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And there I went to an event that they had about the Dodgers and Giants rivalry, and Arnold represented the Giants side of the discussion. And it really kind of got me interested in reading his book, A Day in the Bleachers, which I really enjoyed. I did a little bit more research on him. I said, I would like to interview this gentleman. So I interviewed him for a documentary I did a few years ago called Not Exactly Cooperstown, which was about the Baseball Reliquary. And as I was finishing my last documentary, I'm not sure where this came from, but something tugged at my sleeve to look a little bit deeper into Arnold and his career and his life, and I was surprised by what I had discovered, that this was a person who not only had an extremely prolific career as a writer, but he was also someone who lives and acts on rather noble belief system of, as you mentioned earlier, lending a hand to others, helping to do the right thing, and righting injustices. And he's somebody who walks the talk, and he sort of folded that into his life, his writing, and so I approached him to. At first, I called him up. I said, "Look, I'd like to do a much more extensive interview with you, just about you, because while there have been a lot of interviews with Arnold in text, no one had ever really sat him down in front of a video camera and talked with him about his life and his career as a writer." And I said, "I don't even know what I'm going to do with it. I just know that this is something that is important that needs to be done." And of course, he told me I was completely crazy. He said, 13 people are going to care about this. Nobody cares. This is all old stuff from long ago, and but we did it. We did the first interview in November of 2013, and he sat for 3 hours, and he just spun gold. The stories were remarkable, and we went back, and my cameraman and I went back a few months later in April of 2014. He sat for another 2.5 hours with his wife, Bonnie, and it became very clear that this was a singular story that had flown under the radar of popular culture. It had never been told before, and I decided that I would take up the mantle to tell this rather remarkable story.
Well,
gosh, it goes back to November 2013. My Lord, This has been going on too long.
Well, that makes two of us.
Well, not this interview. Hey, Arnold, may I ask you, it seems that I read Sport, and it seemed that you were a featured column writer in Sport every month when I was growing up in the 50s and early 60s. I know, and I'm not exaggerating on this, you did a lot of writing for Sport, and it seems to me that you wrote about the Latin players coming up. I remember you writing about Orlando Cepeda, the Alus. That was a terrific article.
Roberto Clemente?
Yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. I still remember those wonderful pictures that accompanied the articles. They're in my mind. They're indebted. And I remember the Clemente picture. I think you wrote about Felipe after he had been traded to the Braves, if I'm not mistaken. But let me ask you: were you bilingual growing up, or did you? Were you at all bilingual? In your writing career?
I'm barely unilingual. I'm totally English. I studied French and Latin in high school, either one. And
right.
When my wife and I went into the Peace Corps, we went to
either one. You're very dry. You're very dry, sir. Either one. That didn't get by me. And you went into the Peace Corps after Say
in
again.
my 70th year, and the 50th year, and somebody said, "Is that?" I said, "Yes, you've got to be." She had studied Spanish. She was good. I had not studied any Spanish, and I was horrible, but I barely got by, and my Spanish muy mal, but it's okay. And Bonnie's very good.
Would you tell me something about the Alou brothers that we don't know, maybe? Just
another came into the picture. First Mattei, and then I guess it was, I forget who the next one was.
Oh, don't.
Anyway, each one that came into the picture, Felipe would say he is the best, and then the next one would come in, he is the best, and finally Felipe's son Moses came into the picture, and he was the best.
He was. He had a very nice career, and he ended up as a New York Met. Who do you follow today? Are you a Dodger fan? Did you?
No.
In LA?
Dodger fan. I would have to be, if I were a Dodger fan, I would have had to have been a Dodger fan back in Brooklyn, but I never was. I was a Giant fan then. I'm a Giant fan today.
Okay.
I don't live or die it anymore, but I'm still wrapped up in the Giants.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Felipe was a very modest man, and they all were. And how about Orlando? Orlando Cepeda.
Orlando was more of himself than the others were. After a Giant game, let's say they'd lose a ball game, the game was over for Orlando. He had his 2 hits. He knocked in a run. He would walk around the clubhouse naked with a beer in his hand and eating something or other, or whistling or singing. And Alvin Dark would go crazy because Alvin Dark never lost a game that he shouldn't have won, and that's his feeling. And he would die every time they lose a ball game. And here was Orlando Cepeda singing, having a good time. The game was over. That's a Latin thing that the white establishment never learned, or didn't learn until quite late. Alvin Dark never learned it. And
never learned it. Indeed, I think that was his biggest downfall. He had a Southern kind of mentality that is very limiting when it comes to human interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cepeda would suffer through this because he knocked in 146 runs one year. And
right. And Alvin Dark had this little system of rating players.
Alvin Dark and Charlie Einstein went through every one of those runs they'd knocked in, and none of them ever changed from a tie ball game to a leading ball game. Well, what the hell? You knock in 146 runs, you knock in 146 runs, you cannot wipe it out. And
right, and you're on base. That's another thing. You're on base at the same time. So if you knock in a run, you have a chance of being knocked in.
Well, you're not going to run in the beginning of the game. Okay, fine. You end up maybe winning by that run that you knocked in the beginning of the game. So it was disgusting. And Cepeda,
it's interesting. It's interesting how relief pitching is looked at now, where the key moment in a game's destiny could be the third inning, and you're bringing in your mop-up man at that point. Yeah. Should you not bring in your best pitcher to keep it close? That kind of thing.
Well, I agree. I have a theory that maybe the next big change you'll see will be the 3-inning change. That is, a pitcher going in knowing he's going to pitch to the batting order once, and then he comes out, and a second pitcher comes in to pitch to the batting order for him the first time, and he comes out after 3 innings, and in comes the third man, also facing the top of the order for the first time. So nobody is ever in for 2 or 3 times around. That'll be the next big change you'll see in pitching.
It's almost like the All-Star game, where they'll put a guy in for a couple of innings, and they put in the next guy. Yeah.
I think Dark did something like that back in the '60s, if I remember correctly.
If he did, they all had to be. Well, they all had to be Anglos, though.
Right, right. Exactly. And, you know, there was so much talent. There was Latin American talent on that team. It was the Alous. It was
Marichal.
Marichal. There was Pagan, who was very underrated and very solid when they won.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah, so for him to be that way and for
Ruben
just,
Gomez,
yeah, before that, Ruben Gomez and for the old New York Giants.
Yeah.
Hey, gentlemen, I know your time is limited. It's been a real pleasure for me. I'm going to send you a link to this afterwards, John, and you can share it with Mr. Hano if you would. Thank you. You've been great. I'm going to close the episode in the way I normally do. I'm going to implore my guests and my listeners to keep your dreams wet, keep your humor dry, keep your children out of military recruiting offices. Are you right? And keep your kids off the laps of clerics that wear dresses. That's always a good idea. Am I right, Mr. Hano?
And give peace a chance.
And give peace a chance. Thank you, gentlemen. John, it's a pleasure. Mr. Hano, I can't call you Arnold. I just can't.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can, Ralph.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm tingling, man. Have a great one, and adios, muchachas and muchachos.
Adios, mi amigo.
All right, arriba. See you later.
Bye-bye.